Welcome to another podcast of What's Doing. It's marvelous to read a newspaper or read something online and you see a word that makes you smarter and you realize, wow, I need a dictionary. But yet it's thrilling to grab the dictionary and look up a word and sorceling. What's that?
It's my favorite word.
Yes, I had to look it up. The word is enchanting. And we're here today with the columnist from the New York Times, the Pulitzer Prize winner. She's written there since 1995. She's written books about men, politics, and her latest book is about Hollywood stars, Notorious. Welcome, Maureen Dowd from the New York Times. I love you because you use words. Is that what an Irish writer does? That I don't read people that read the words that you use. It's challenging.
Well, I get a very mixed reaction to that. Some people are like, why are you using these big words that we have to look up? And other people, a lot of people have come up to me on the book tour and said, I love that. I love learning new words. But sometimes I'm learning it with them. Like if I've used the same adjective a bunch of times about Trump or something, I want to freshen it up with a new adjective. So I might also be learning the word. But also I just got my master's degree at Columbia. And, I read about some guy in the 18th century who used to keep a box full of new words. So I got a green tequila box and started stuffing new words in it. So I have that at home too.
What did you do with Columbia journalism?
No, I got my master's in English literature. Before all the campus unrest, because they took over Hamilton Hall where I was studying Shakespeare.
Well, there you go. Well, yeah. And we'll get into you with your love of Shakespeare. You're an Irish Catholic woman writer. Was it hard for you to break in? You didn't go to journalism school.
That's such a great question. There's a funny story. When I was only the second woman on the White House beat, and I covered Bush Sr., and he had a pollster named Bob Teeter. So I was covering Bush Sr. with my usual style. And I think Bush Sr. was expecting someone named Clyde Farnsworth III. And, he could discuss the Atlantic Alliance with him over a martini on Air Force One. And he got me. And so Bob Teeter took me to dinner. And after a couple martinis, he said, we don't see you as the New York Times White House reporter. And I'm like, why? I said, because I'm a woman and ethnic. And he said, yes, we see you more at the New York Daily News or the Chicago Tribune. And I was just thinking, and finally I just said, well, it's not your choice, who is the New York Times White House reporter. But Bush, in all fairness, he did have a hard time with it in the beginning, but then he was such a gentleman. He got over it and treated me totally fairly.
There you go.
We had like a 30-year correspondence, and he called it a love-hate relationship, but there was no hate. He was a really lovely person, and he did have a hard time when I was criticizing his son about Iraq. But we, got through that basically because I think he agreed with me. He also thought it was not a good idea to go into Iraq.
Well, it's interesting you brought this up, and you surprised me with this. My father, like you, is a Democrat, Irish Catholic writer, but he told me, one of the great Republican guys I liked my whole life. I said, who's that, Pop? He told me, George Bush Sr.
Yeah,
he's a good fella. Used to drink with him. Told me he was great.
Yeah, he's great. He was great. And he, when my mom died, he wrote me the loveliest note and he told me about his mom. And, he'd say, I know you're a journalist, but if you ever need anything, please get in touch.
I love that. You see, because then at that time you could cross a line and communicate with people. It didn't matter party so much as the person. But now I think that's substantially changed.
Oh, well, there's a world of difference. Bush Sr., I went down to have lunch with him after he was president in about 2011. And he was in a wheelchair then he had a variation of Parkinson's. And, it was hard. But I said to him, this was before Trump had even thought about running. And I asked him about Trump. And Bush Sr. said, he's an ass. And then when Trump later got in the race and began completely eviscerating Jeb, his low energy Jeb, and he was trashing W, Bush really grew to hate him, Bush Sr., and he would throw his shoe at the television set when Trump came on.
Why do you think that Trump is so eager to be such a, I think you used the term wolf pack, turn a wolf pack against even you? I mean, he called you, I think, a moronic imbecile or a nitwit or something. I mean, I've never heard presidents really doing that.
I know it's the Times has had to change its rules because we never used words about or by presidents like, dirty words or whatever. And Trump speaks in such vulgarities that the Times had to decide to actually use some of them. But yeah, he is an attention addict. And so he really craves attention. The attention he wants is from the New York Times and CNN and stuff, but he just feels the need to diminish the press, even as he is craving the attention of the press.
That's the interesting thing that I find with him, because my father said, you never bow down to power, nor back down from the truth. How do you stand firm in the face of intimidation and threats? Who decides to give a press conference? It's not fair that Trump does this. I mean, he's bossing everyone around. And I love you because, and that's what fascinated me about you. You're fearless.
Well, it took a long time to get this way. I started out like super, super shy. My family never, ever thought I could be in a profession where it's like The Godfather. I take one of theirs, they take two of mine, we all go to the mattresses. I mean, they are in a state of shock still that I am criticizing US presidents and they're criticizing me.
And how do you feel when the president criticizes you? I think Donald Trump said, in quote, wacky at New York Times Dowd, who hardly knows me, makes up things that I never said for her boring interviews and column. A neurotic dope, end quote.
I know, I have it blown up in a big poster in my office, all his
how's it feel to be called a neurotic dope?
Well, he always uses the same insults about women. We're crazy or we don't know him. I don't really care. I mean, I've had like President Obama made a joke about me once from the podium at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And, it was deeply embarrassing or something. But with Trump, I mean, because he trashes everyone, he just had a press conference and Caitlin Collins, who's fantastic, was asking him a question. And he said, CNN doesn't love America. I mean, what does that mean? Where does he get off saying something like that?
I don't know. He's undermining news media.
Well, he and Elon was helping him because Elon was saying to people on X, you are the legacy media. There is no legacy media. And now Trump is trying to replace New York Times and CNN and ABC and CBS in the front row with partisan reporters. And Steve Bannon has his own White House reporter, and Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, has his own White House reporter. My researcher, Andrew Trunsky, just did a great piece yesterday about the Steve Bannon White House reporter who, wears these crazy mini skirts and
I
is
read it.
very,
I read it.
yeah, outgoing. And she seems kind of fun, like someone who would be a Regina George character,
With what credentials?
but this is the problem. They're partisan. So it's like the guy, Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend, is one of these partisan reporters. And he was in the Oval Office when Zelensky and Vance and Trump were in there. And Trump and Vance were treating Zelensky like a busboy. And so the reporter weighs in and says to Zelensky, "Why aren't you wearing a suit?" The reporter is not supposed to be asking questions like this that are on the partisan side of the White House. So, but that's what it is. They're trying to, Trump is trying to create his own alternate reality where with, what Kellyanne Conway called alternate facts. And so he wants these partisan reporters to help him create that. But that kind of came a cropper with the market crash, because the market crash and bonds going down are, you can't spin that when you get into people's 401ks. You can't just say, no, that didn't happen. It happened.
My father used to tell me, we need the press because government unchecked is a problem.
Yeah, well, Dick Cheney tried to diminish checks and balances during the buildup to the Iraq War. And now Trump is trying to do it. They're trying to build up executive power. And then they're looking for a booking, as I used to say when I was little, they're cruising for a fight with the judiciary. They're going back and forth.
Or what you said, they're looking for a booking.
Yeah, yeah. And
Your father's great line.
And then they are with Doge, they were taking over the prerogatives of Congress. Congress is supposed to be the one who decides, does this agency exist or are we funding it? And so they're trying to diminish Congress, diminish the judiciary, diminish the press, and build up executive power.
Look, you seem to me like a woman with tremendous confidence, obviously understanding everything. Does it infuriate you that journalists are obedient almost to Trump or to anyone in power? That's not the job of a journalist, not the way I was brought up.
Well, I don't think normal journalists are, but this new cadre of partisan journalists are. Yeah, I mean, it's the weirdest thing I've ever seen in Washington that Republicans are so craven, that they don't speak up on stuff they know is wrong. And I mean, I think New York Times journalists and CNN journalists and other legitimate journalists are pushing back and doing a great job, but it gets harder and harder because they're getting thrown out of their places at the White House. And, Trump he has Fox, so he has a whole network that is backing his alternative universe.
Doesn't it enrage you as an independent thinker that this is happening in a profession?
Well, I try to stay calm, Kevin, because I can't work in a constant state of rage.
My father said rage is the only quality which kept him or anybody else he ever studied writing columns for newspapers.
Well, he was a genius.
He worked on the rage.
Yeah, I can only aspire to Jimmy Breslin's rage.
No, the reason why I wanted to say hello to you and thank you is because I said, wow, she's so similar to my father in so many ways. Clearly independent, clearly does not, unless I've misread you, care what anyone thinks, and yet you can write a sentence clearly.
I don't know. I think I spend a lot more time hiding under the bed than he did. I mean, I'm still kind of, shy and interior. But it seems so clear when a president is doing something wrong, you just have to call them on it. You don't really have any choice. And I hate when he does things like calling CNN un-American. It's just gross.
No, because my father said Trump manipulates the media the whole time with razzle dazzle effects. And I believe you've said similar. He knows how to deflect.
Yeah. Well, people always ask me, because I have studied Shakespeare a lot, which Shakespearean character he's like, but he's really more like P.T. Barnum. He's a showman and he's a con man. And I think it's an interesting question for Democrats. Do they want to match that by getting their own showman, or do they want to stay away from celebrity? Because with Kamala, there was a lot of criticism. Oh, she had Beyonce and it didn't help. And it made them seem more elitist. So do they stay away from celebrity entirely, or do they find a showman to counter the showman?
Wow. Do you think he uses humor and hiding sort of the villain that he may be? I was hoping for the best from him, to be frank with you, and it doesn't seem to be going that way.
Well, as you know, my siblings are all Trump.
Yes.
And I called my sister and brother a couple of days ago to see how they felt about the global markets crashing, and we've lost all our allies and everyone hates us. And they were very calm. My sister said, she likes what he's done with the border. She likes, she likes the whole thing about biological men not being allowed in women's sports. And while she doesn't like what's going on with the markets, she and my brother think he will straighten it out. They have faith in him, even though he really doesn't seem to know what he's doing, and his math seems very, very fuzzy. Like, as I said in my column Sunday, I went to summer school in algebra. I'm no math expert, but he is using bad math formulas, clearly.
It's funny you say that. And we're not going to annihilate Trump here, but my father even said, my father early on did not like Trump. We come from the same neighborhood. Cuomo's lived a mile that way. Trump lived a mile that way. And here was my father, a journalist in the middle, a newspaper writer. And it always amazed me, like he said, Trump became larger than life. He respected that, but he said he knew how to, better than anybody he ever saw, good or bad, be able to shift people around and have them believe his way. And right now he's dismantling the whole institution of media and newspapers and writers and having publishers scared. This is not acceptable.
Yeah, well, Trump based his persona on the larger than life people he saw. So he was hanging out at Yankee Stadium and he was studying George Steinbrenner. I think Cary Grant would come once in a while to Yankee Stadium, and there was some king of the furriers and king of the limos, those type of businessmen.
Yep.
And Trump would look at all these larger than life New York businessmen,
Yep.
and he blended in some Roy Cohn, and he created this persona. So that's what we have in the Oval now.
This episode of Breslin's What's Doing is brought to you by Medford Fast Lube. Put your car in good hands. With more than 25 years of experience, the experts at Medford Fast Lube will care for your vehicle like it's our own without breaking the bank. Take the stress out of the unexpected. If your car needs repair, it can be expensive as well as stressful. Take some of that weight off your shoulders with free estimates from the experts at Medford Fast Lube. Our friendly staff is here to help. Located at Route 112 in Medford, New York. www.medfordfastlube.com or dial 631-475-2107. Medford Fast Lube. Advisor Insurance Group. Advisor Insurance resource experts in life, disability, long-term care, business, home, and auto insurance across the U.S. With over 60 insurance companies offered and over 30 years of combined experience, Advisor Insurance Resource simply can't be beat. Call 866-942-4181 or on the web at advisorinsurancresource.com. Bamonte's. Bamonte's at 32 Withers Street, Brooklyn, New York, is a family-owned and operated Italian-American restaurant that has been in business since 1900. It is the oldest Italian restaurant in Brooklyn and one of the oldest in New York City. Once again, try our delicious food at 32 Withers Street, Brooklyn, or call 718-384-8831. Bamontes.
Let me ask you, you didn't go to journalism school.
No. Mm-mm. But I
What-
started at the very bottom. I was like we called it dictationist before computers. When reporters would call in, I worked at the Washington Star, which was an afternoon newspaper, and reporters would call in and I would type their copy, like from the Watergate trial.
did you work there with the great editor, Jim Bellows?
Oh, I loved him. He was so great. In fact, I had a tennis column, and he came over to me one day and he goes, reading about tennis is like watching grass grow. It's so boring. I just wanted to crawl into a hole because I idolized him. He was so charismatic. He was charismatic like at a Ben Bradley level. And
Yes.
we felt that we had our own Ben Bradley when he was in charge. He was really a cool guy.
Did you know that he's the guy that gave my father his break?
Yes. He was very proud of that.
See, the world is small. My
Yeah.
father loved him. The name Jim Bellows was sacrosanct. Bellows.
Yeah. He was fantastic.
Bellows number one. Bellows was number one in the
Because
whole
don't
game.
you think that executive editors need some charisma? I mean, I think it works better when you've got like a very charismatic executive editor like Bellows.
Well, he loved writers.
Yeah, he loved them.
And he
Not
loved
tennis writers, but other.
but he loved what you do. And he
Yeah.
loved how he brought my father along. You give opinion. You're not afraid to give your opinion, Maureen.
Sometimes I'm afraid.
You might be shy, but you do it.
Yeah, you have to do it because you're getting paid to do it. So you have to do it.
But yet when you sit there and clack away, you know what you're driving for. When I read your pieces, I go, wow. It's almost like they're visceral and you're not afraid to do it. Most of the writing, I think, lately seems very uninspired or flat.
Well, I think the problem is that sometimes people are so in their corners now that you can almost predict what they're going to write before they write it. Everybody is either way over on the right or way over on the left, and I don't really do an ideological column, which took Times readers a while to get used to. They weren't used to that. But I'm trying to do it more from a Shakespearean angle of, is this a good king or is this king corrupt? Are they using their power well or badly? Not, are they Republican or Democrat?
You compared him to Richard III.
Yeah.
People might not be aware of Shakespeare, so we have to be careful here.
Yeah. He is a little, here's the thing that's like Trump and Richard III. Richard III was a villain, but he sort of charmed the audience because he used humor, and he would come up to the end of the stage and he would tell them in a very conspiratorial way. He would wrap them up in his plans and he would say, here's the bad thing I'm about to do. And so the audience tended to like Richard III, even though they should have hated him, because he was very charismatic with them. And humor counters, when Trump says all this funny, wacky stuff and redecorates the Oval Office like Liberace, it takes some of the fear out of his more authoritarian statements.
It's funny, this is why I said you're very similar to my father. You might not like that, and I mean it in the most complimentary way. And he's not that easy a guy to be similar to, and you're not that easy to be similar to either, I think. But he said, Trump, in the crinkling of an eye, senses better than anyone the insecurity of people. Doesn't he know that nobody knows whether anything is good or bad until they are told, and he is quite willing to tell them immediately.
Yeah, I mean, his nicknames are very visceral, and psychological. And I'm always kind of amazed that people like Marco Rubio, get over all the Trump insults and come to work for him. I would have a hard time doing that.
Well, you said the current administration feels reminiscent of Greek mythology, where the leaders were cruel and capricious.
Yeah, Trump and Elon remind me more of Greek gods than of Shakespearean figures, except for that one trait of Richard III, because they remind me of like Zeus and Dionysus. Dionysus was the god of fertility. So is Elon Musk. He's just going to have 100 babies and 100 more on Mars. But Trump, I think he likes to hurl thunderbolts and be vengeful, and the gods are very capricious, like if they wanted a human woman.
Well, you made some fun of him saying, didn't you make, or was it you or someone that said they asked him about a math quiz and he times it all and he couldn't get it right, but he said, no, that's the number.
Oh yeah, no, he was on Howard Stern. And with Don Jr. and Ivanka. And Don Jr. and Ivanka were saying they had gotten into Wharton on their own merits. They weren't Nepo babies. And so Howard Stern, gave them a math quiz. I forget, he asked 17 times 6 or something. And so then none of them could answer it. And Trump said 11, 12, whatever that means. I don't even know. And then he said 112, which wasn't right. So it was 102. And, it was just a fun thing. But I think it proved Howard Stern's point.
Yeah, well, he took out an ad in the newspaper once against my father with the Central Park Five. And he wrote, "Between you and I."
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And my father used to call him "Between you and I, Trump." That drove my father out of his mind because we were brought up between you and me.
No, that drives me out of my mind too. But, even a lot of other supposedly smart presidents do it. People just don't know. But I always correct people on that. Someone gave me a sign for Christmas that I have in my house at home. I'm silently judging your grammar.
I know you are.
Judging your grammar.
You said that Trump, and we keep hammering about him, but there's never been a president that's hammered so much on writers, on freedom of speech. This is a very dangerous area. You called him a small man, I believe.
Well, I think that the incident with the AP, where the AP is a global organization. So when they decided not to use the term Gulf of America instead of Gulf of Mexico, they have a lot of clients that they're dealing with. And just the whole revenge thing is, I think, makes Trump seem very small. So he cut the AP out. They weren't allowed to write on Air Force One or be in the pool in the Oval Office. And that's just a very small thing to do. And think about it. I mean, Trump could just extend that to anything that came out of his mouth. He could say anything and then say, if you don't go along with that, I'm not going to allow you to do your job. AP can't properly do its job if Trump has this capricious, that's where he seems like Zeus, where they would get mad at people and turn them into cows or, make them wander the earth. I mean, it's just what he's doing to the AP is so patently unfair.
Washington Post, the editor just left there. I mean, what do you think about a guy like Bezos taking away a whole editorial section?
Yeah, I think it really undermines the integrity of the Post. And I don't know why Bezos would want to, I guess he has other businesses he's thinking about, but I don't know why you'd want to buy this crown jewel of journalism and ruin it. I mean, the minute he, my friend Ruth Marcus quit, my friend David Shipley, who was the editorial page editor, quit. I mean, once he said he was going to be dictating what you couldn't write about in the editorial section, the whole paper just lost all its integrity
and opinion.
Yeah.
In your opinion, if your opinion was thwarted, what would you do?
Yeah, I would have to quit. I mean, I saw Ruth. She came to my book party in DC and I congratulated her. They don't really have a choice. Of course, they have to quit. But again, these tech gods and Trump are playing with people's lives and livelihoods and reputations.
Colin Miner said to say hello to you, by the way. He said, Trump is a Queen's con man version of Mussolini. He said that he's a small man who has found a balcony, to tell Maureen. And I said, my father said that about Giuliani. He's a small man in search of a balcony. I'm just very...
Wait, I was going to ask you, Kevin, how did your father, what were the events he saw with Trump that caused him to form his opinion early on?
Here, I have it in the notes, but I didn't want to bore the hell out of everyone. Well, first off, between you and I, Trump. And then he had a theory about a thing, and I'll read it to you because that's a good question. And thank you, because you're usually the one asking the questions. And of course, you asked the great one. He knew Trump was a con man from the beginning. He used to go around to his apartments just to look at the buildings to see what they were like in New York and to get an idea of the rents. And the rents were so astronomical, he couldn't even figure out how anyone, and he made a good living, could even afford that. But yet people would want to be in his buildings with the gold and the opulence. Now, granted, they were nice, but he said to me, Trump survives by Quorum's law. And I said, what's that? He said, Quorum's law was a guy named Bill Quorum. He was a sometimes journalist who was hired to run the Kentucky Derby at a time of crisis. Newspapers all over the world claimed Louisville was a place where Derby visitors were robbed. Quorum took the job, but insisted that the problem was not a problem. If a guy from North Dakota goes home from here after the race and he has to be met because he doesn't even have the cab fare, that guy is going to say to himself, wow, I must have had a hell of a time. I can't wait for next year. But if the same guy goes home and he still has half his money, he's going to say, I guess I didn't have a great time after all. Because, gentlemen, this is the rule. A sucker has to get screwed. Bill Quorum quoted Breslin, the master of the steal. And my father said Trump was exactly that, the master of the steal. And I guess it bothered him from the beginning. He took after kids that were going to be accused of a murder in Central Park to Central Park 5. And that's such a long time ago. But I think Trump, he just, his look, we come from Queens County. My father knew his father. His father had obviously business dealings in the county. And I guess he didn't like Donald the way he became such a big shot so quickly in New York. And he watched him rise and he criticized him daily. When most people didn't. He said most of the news people, when Donald called, said, oh, the Donald's calling. And Trump on a phone call would have all these guys doing whatever he wanted. He knew how to beat them. He said to me, they're suckers, meaning the other writers. Trump never did that with my father, and I know he never did it with you.
Well, I would love to hear your father's reaction.
Call him 1-800-EVANS.
Well, one, which I thought would hurt Trump more than it did, was when he pretended to be his own PR agent and would call reporters as John Barron and say, oh, Madonna and Carla Bruni are dying to go out with Donald Trump. I mean, I can't even imagine what your dad would say.
Well, Maureen, this is what I'm getting at. It's not, he's a genius in terms of manipulating the media.
He is. David Axelrod calls him a feral genius because he can have a lot of success with creating this alternative universe. But as I say, I feel like that all came crashing down when it comes up against a reality you can't spin, like the price of bonds. Trump promised, his main campaign promise was that he was going to lower prices. And the only prices he lowered were stock prices.
For a certain class.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So what do you tell young writers today? I mean, is it even worth a shot, even trying to be in this business? I have a niece in journalism school at NYU, and she's paying an exorbitant amount of money. And I think to myself, I went to NYU, and I'm thinking to myself, how could you pay this money to go there? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm not.
I mean, if someone asked me about that, I would say it's better to study history than journalism, because that's what you're going to need. Because a lot of young people don't realize the patterns of history and what we've seen before. And I think that would be more valuable. As for journalism, it's hard. I mean, every place where people used to come up, like the Times used to use the St. Petersburg Times as a farm team, and all those places don't exist anymore. Like I worked at the Washington Star, there aren't papers like that. It's been so winnowed out. So how do you get the experience? There are no farm teams like in baseball.
Oh, that's beautiful when you say winnowed out. Words matter. It's funny why I say you're close and similar. I said to my father once, Pop, if you didn't study journalism, he studied journalism. He was at the desk at 16 running copy at night. He didn't go to journalism school, but he said, if I had to do it all over again, you know what I'd study? I said, what? He goes, history.
Yeah, exactly. Journalists are so ahistorical. And if they don't see that a lot of these patterns get repeated. And I don't know. Yeah, I did the same thing. I was the clerk for 2.5 years, and it's hard, but you can. And that's another thing I feel sorry about young people about, because with COVID, they didn't have a newsroom. And then a lot of people are never coming back to the newsroom. So the way I learned to be a journalist was just by watching journalists. And then I would be there when the editor would need someone to go cover a murder. And you'd just be sitting there, and they'd say at 5 a.m, and they'd say, go cover this murder. And so you learned by example and by doing it. But I don't know if they don't. And the weird part about it, Kevin, is a lot of the younger people don't want to come to the office. We just had picket lines. I had to cross a picket line about this, but I really didn't respect the premise that our tech union wanted 5 days a week off. They don't ever want to come in the office. I don't understand. I never would have had anyone to date. I never would have learned how to do journalism. I wouldn't have had any friends. I still have the same friends I made on the copy desk at the Washington Star. And I don't know how alone in their apartments they can achieve that.
Very isolating.
Very.
Well, if someone had to say to me, what do you think about Maureen Dowd and her writing? I say, she's big. She's big. And I have to thank you so much for this and your time. And I was thinking, aside from you and my father, another guy that I loved his words, George Orwell. And he had a beautiful thing to say. The further a society drifts away from the truth, the more it will hate those who speak it.
Yeah, he also said, words should be used to reveal, not obscure. And that's another specialty of Trump. He uses words to obscure, not reveal.
Well, it's been your lifelong job to reveal what you don't like, and you've done it marvelously. And I look forward to continue reading you. And I hope everyone goes out and buys your book, Notorious.
Thank you for having me, Kevin.
Oh, thank you.